Have you ever worked for an executive that you really had trouble taking seriously? You had trouble really starting to zero in on what it is that they wanted you to do, and worse, you had trouble respecting them because, in a sense, you didn't really know where they were coming from. Now, if that's been you and you've been in that role, then you know the importance of how to communicate to your team in a way that has a balance between the almost two impossible sides of the spectrum when it comes to leadership. There is approachability and assertiveness. So approachability and assertiveness. How do you communicate in a way where you are showing your team that you are a leader, that you're communicating strength, that you're communicating executive gravitas, but at the same time that you're approachable enough where if things start to shake and the ship starts to break, who are they going to come to? You want them to come to you. You don't want them to go to the person that's going to take it more serious. So today we're going to examine how to strike that balance and move forward in a way that communicates clarity. Let's get into it.
Welcome to the Sam Linton Show, the podcast designed to help you shift your mindset, find your voice, and change your world. Sam is a pastor, coach, and expert communicator, helping leaders and entrepreneurs like you step into their purpose, speak with confidence, and make a lasting difference.
All right. So there's a problem that we have that is so prevalent when it comes to executive leadership, because the buzzword around most campfires when it comes to how we speak is we want to be authentic, we want to be approachable, we want to be real. And all that is true. But there's a point in time where there is going to be a need for you to assert yourself, whether it be in terms of vision or delegation, like we talked about last week, if you missed that. And if you are so overly concerned with being accessible, then your efficacy will come into question. So I'll give you a story. I worked for a couple managers over the course of my time in the private sector. I'll go all the way back to McDonald's. And I worked for a lot of different managers at McDonald's. Doesn't matter who they were, but I worked for McDonald's for quite a while. I was going to be a manager. This was when I was 16, 17. I was a manager as well, a shift manager, 18. And I was doing that actually after I graduated a little bit. Now, I'm going to give you the difference between, I'm going to call it two sets of managers. One, we're going to call her Jane, and the other one, we're going to call him Randy. All right, so Jane, when she would come in, everybody would be quiet. Like if I was in the middle of a conversation, the conversation would instantly end because Jane was there. She came in, she was poised, she knew her work, she knew the job, and literally the whole entire atmosphere changed when she was there. So no one wanted to approach her. So if there was a problem with call off, there was a problem with personnel, there was a problem with inventory, they didn't want to mention it to her. The shift managers were afraid of her. I wasn't really particularly afraid of her because I was bullied as a kid. And once you get to a certain point, things don't bother you. So I never had a problem dealing with this kind of person. But I could tell that other people did. So Jane was one side of the spectrum. Then we're going to go to Randy. When Randy came in and he dressed like everybody else dressed. Like his uniform was disheveled. He was still a manager, still a store manager. He had always making jokes. Like he would come in late. He would start random conversations. Whenever there was a bigger boss that was there, he would pretend like he was the one that was being reprimanded. And everybody loved working with Randy. Everybody loved it. And Randy didn't really give any kind of guidance. He didn't really give any kind of direction, but they just wanted him around. And if push came to shove, they wanted to be able to kind of sort through and pull through to get to Jane's leadership style. But there was a misshapen way that people looked at dealing with both Randy and Jane. Because both of them exhibited either high measure of accessibility, that would be Randy, or high measure of authority, which would be Jane. Now, this is a dumb illustration, but it's very important because I guarantee you, if you're an executive leader, you tend to go in one direction or the other. I'll tell you my tendency, I tend to be the one that's approachable. That's always been my way. Even when I was leading in other organizations, I still have that way about me. And there are problems with leaning on that. I know that God has used that for me in a lot of ways in the church, but there's also problems because in some cases and sometimes it lacks the authority. So this matters. We have to find the balance. You need both for influence and results. You need to be approachable enough that your team will want to work with you. You need to be authoritative enough that you can cast vision and delegate with accountability. All of them are important. So I'm going to give you a couple things that are going to help you to be very, very cautious. If you're an overly friendly executive, so if you're the overly friendly one, if you're the super approachable one, here's some I guess I would say these are probably some guardrails or some landmines that you're going to run into. Okay, the first one, you are going to avoid conflict like the plague. If you tend to want to aim for approachability, you are going to want to avoid conflict like the plague. It's going to be your kryptonite. You're going to find something wrong, and in your mind, you're going to think, it's better that I just take care of this than if I have a confrontation about this. So that's going to cause a problem. Second of all, if you are a overly friendly, overly accessible executive, you are most likely going to be very vague when it comes to your instructions. Last week, it's worth going back, look at what we talked about with regard to delegation and how delegation impacts how people experience your executive leadership and how you communicate in a way where you delegate. So if you're not able to manage that side of things in a good way, if you're not able to be specific enough that people know that they're hitting your targets when you set them forward, then you're not doing a good job on the delegation side. And a lot of times it's because you want to be approachable. You don't want to tell somebody that these 12 things need done by noon. Instead, you go, hey, can you work on this? Are you able to work on this? And so they hear a vague direction and they give you vague output. And then you end up working till midnight or 1 or 2 in the morning trying to bring the proverbial ship into the port. It happens a lot. So the over-friendly executive tends to avoid conflict and they issue vague executive expectations. Next, the assertive one, the assertive executive, the one that is the authoritarian, the one that you would say, oh, this person is very, very kind of easy to hang out with, or no, I'm sorry, not so easy to hang out with. They're competent, but they're kind of intimidating. This person is going to struggle with intimidating people. They can't really get a good read on what's going on in their organization because they are not seeing it, because people behave differently. They're afraid of them. They're afraid of interacting with them. I was talking to somebody this past week who is an executive like that, and they come across in a very intimidating way. Don't intimidate me. I don't work for them. But I could see where in their role, that intimidation factor is such a problem because it's going to lead them to lose time because they're not going to be able to make the connections. And then another component of that, not only are people intimidated by them, there's really no feedback loop to see whether or not what they're doing is effective. Nobody's ever going to say it's ineffective. Nobody's ever going to say, holy moly, you're terrible at your job, or oh my goodness, like you didn't handle that well. They have no way of knowing. So they think they're doing well simply because they're doing what they've always done, and they don't know. I spoke at an event a couple weeks ago, and I met a CFO or somebody that was in an executive role, and I could immediately tell by meeting them. Again, they don't work for me. I wasn't intimidated, but I could tell that they casted this intimidating shadow when they spoke. And I wondered how many people worked for them, probably glad to work for them because of what they'd learn from them. but probably scared to work for them because of what they experience working under them. So we have to find that balance. And so this is where your communication comes in clutch, because if you can't articulate in a way that balances these two, you are going to find yourself in a very dangerous territory with regard to your influence. Now, I'm going to give you some simple, I don't want to say hacks, these are tricks or some considerations that will help you to kind of edge together a really good persona of how you connect to your people, and you clearly define where they need to go. All right, so this is called warmth plus weight. Warmth plus weight. We want to have a warmness to our approach, but we want to have a weight to the things that we say. So how do we get the warmth? Let's get the warmth down first. So the warmth. Warmth starts with asking open-ended questions. I've talked about this. I've talked about it over and over again. It's a hack for executive leaders. You want to be more of a questioner than a orderer. I don't know how many ers are in there, but you get the gist. This is what's going to keep people wanting to interact with you, because you're asking questions. And so when you start off by saying, how do you think this is going? What do you think is happening with this project? Instead of saying this needs done, that needs done, or you just leave something vague, you let them take ownership and part of the conversation with open-ended questions. This communicates approachability. It communicates that you're not just wanting to give them orders, but you're wanting to direct them and guide them, knowing first where they are. Another thing that's, when you're asking these open-ended questions, is you want to use a tool that is called reflective listening. Now, be careful. Reflective listening can be abused, and sometimes people will do reflective listening so much that it's really just another form of talking. So I had a skit I did one time with a group that I was training, where the executive comes in and he would say something, and then the person that works for him would say something else. And every time we go, right? Mm-hmm, yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right. And every other word, the executive was interjecting some sort of a filler word to illustrate that he's still part of the conversation. Reflective listening isn't really like that. Reflective listening is more you listening for a strip of time and then having enough confidence to say, what I'm hearing from you is, and then restate in your terms what you heard them say so that you can put both of you on the same page. This requires you to be focused on them. This requires you to be asking questions of clarity. This requires you to maybe be open to being wrong with the way you're interpreting their communication, because truth be told, they may not be communicating exactly what they're feeling and what exactly is going on. And it's your job to do some sort of communication sleuthing in order to get to the bottom of what the issue is. Now, we could talk about this for hours and hours, but along with that, you want to make sure that your body language is mimicking the warmth that you're trying to convey. So you want eye contact, head nodding, making sure your body posture is open and not closed, like your arms are closed or your hands are folded. You want to make sure that it's open so that people see that you're inviting this conversation. And then if it's something sensitive, like, oh, this employee hasn't come to work for 10 days and I feel like they're goofing off or whatever, if you see that they're starting to hesitate, you can make a safety type of communication. Look, no penalty in you being honest. I'm not going to judge them for you saying this. I appreciate you saying something. You want to give them the green light for that authenticity. It's your job to sort through what that looks like. It's their job to be authentic with you enough so that you can get to the bottom of whatever the problem is. And then another way to communicate warmth, and this is so huge, but it's also a difficult line, is you want to share some sort of small vulnerability that builds a connection. So let's say you're working, I'll give you an example of this. So let's say you're working on a project with a group of people and the project's not going well and everybody's a little bit tense and you're leading the team. You just say, look, I'm staying up at night thinking about this too because our butt's on the line here. We're worried. I'm worried about how this is going to reflect us and me. And you tell them in the same vein that you're with them and show them some sort of small vulnerability that you understand. They see that you understand where they're coming from. So that's how you communicate a little bit better with regard to warmth. All right. So don't hesitate to try that because it's going to pay off dividends because people are going to be more likely to interact with you. All right, now let me give you some tips to go on the other side. So if you are the teddy bear executive and you struggle with assertiveness, here's some ways that you can kind of navigate that by building some more authority into your communication. So first, you want to use more direct language. Now, if you're just used to dealing in the ethereal and how's this going and what's going on and like nothing's ever, you want to use more direct language. So it's completely appropriate to say, our priority for this season is blank. And you want to use that language. Our priority for this season is blank. So we had, our church has a lot of different programs. And there's one program that kind of shines above every other program that we've ever done, and it's called Rooted. It's a discipleship program where we get adults to come through, and they make really strong commitments in terms of their faith and learning about Jesus and connecting to the church, connecting to other people. It's really intense. So when the seasons come for those programs to start, we make it known on our staff that our priority is these programs. Our priority is to fill these programs. And we do it, and we're doing it directly, and we're not doing it in an apologetic way, but we're letting people know that when we are in this season, this is the season about this. And the direct language we use is like, this is the most important thing you can do. This is the most important thing as leaders we can focus on, right? And you want to be where you're doing it where it's not an emotional type of plea. Like, hey, I'm sick of all this other stuff. We have to focus on this. You don't want to do that. You want to use direct language to mitigate the emotion. You want to say, this is what our priority is right now. You don't try to get into an emotional discussion, which will happen a lot of times if you're not as an assertive of a leader. So you want to stick to the talking point of this is what our priority is. Another way that you want to use a little bit more assertiveness is by removing word-filling softeners. There's like a water softener that you could put to make your water less hard at your house. Well, there are word softeners that we use. So these are and this is only if we struggle with assertiveness. You don't want to do this if you're already struggling with warmth. You want to do this if you're struggling with assertiveness. And you might tend to say, this is what you tend to say if you struggle with being assertive. You say, well, maybe by next week we can do this, or it might be good if we start following the protocol when it comes to how we set up online giving, or it could be good if this, or I was thinking, wouldn't it be cool if, no. You want to try instead to remove those filters and go, by next week, let's have blank done. Not, it would be nice if by next week. By next week, let's have blank done. And you use language where you're removing those softeners. Maybe we could have this done. It might be good if we get into this. You could feel that hesitancy. And the hesitancy is they're not going to like what you have to say. But spoiler alert, if you're a leader, they're not going to like all that you have to say. That's the truth. They're not going to like your direction a lot of times. They're not going to like the way that the process has to go. But as a leader, if you call the shots, you have to take the shots. And it sometimes requires you to maybe go in an unpopular direction for the sake of the vision. You could always realign them to the vision, but it's going to be difficult to always do that while also having these verbal fillers where you say, maybe we could try this, or this will be cool, or I'd love it if this, or I miss this, or whatever. Another thing when you're struggling with assertiveness, you have to set clear expectations and timelines. So I would say before you even have a conversation, before you even get into a discussion of what needs to happen, write down when does this need done by and what is expected. So it is clear to you exactly what you're expecting from them. Vague doesn't work. If you tell somebody that's working for you, hey, I need you to get a little bit better about your schedule, and they say, okay, they have no direction and you have given them none. But if you say, hey, I need you to work in the office at least 2 days a week and not leave for 3 hours at a clip, that is a clear direction. And you have to be clear about that, because trying a little harder to them might mean, all right, I was just less late than I normally am. Instead of 10 minutes late, I was only 5 minutes late. I'm killing it. 50% increase on my lateness, right? Or decrease, I should say. So you have to communicate exactly what compliance looks like, what the win looks like. And most executives that have struggles with assertiveness, they struggle with the area of being clear enough to hold somebody accountable. And that's the last part. You have to be willing to have those accountability conversations. And so it's not, and we can talk all about, different scenarios, different real life situations. And, you've probably seen some of my previous episodes about giving feedback. There's a way to do it where you don't end the world on them. You don't tell them they're the worst human being that's ever lived because they suck at this part of their job. You can do it with warmth, but you have to do it. It has to happen. And there's ways to go about doing that, which is beyond the scope of this episode. You just have to strike that balance. All right. So what do we want to close on? So I'm going to give you just some things to think about. And by the way, this is what I help people do because I'm an executive coach. I'm a trainer. Podcast at SamuelLinton.com if you would like to connect and I could coach you. I would love to coach your team. I could coach your executive team. All of it's on the table. I would love to help your team to deliver this stuff better and to handle these situation by situation communication issues that come up better. I am your guy. All right. But with that said, as a leader, I'm going to close with this. The most important thing is you have to balance authority with approachability. Without the approachability, you're not going to know what's going on and people aren't going to come to you when there's a problem. Without the authority, people aren't going to trust that you have the wherewithal and the gravitas to carry the finish line or carry the prize over to the finish line. So you have to balance both of them, and communication is your quickest way to demonstrate that you are exactly the leader that you need to be in that situation. So with that said, thank you for tuning in to the Sam Linton Show. Shift your mindset, find your voice, change your world. We'll see you next time.